Okay. Good evening, colleagues, and welcome to the Cabinet meeting in Croydon. Are we broadcasting, Jim? Okay. Apologies for absence.
Leader, I've received an apology for absence from Councillor Wayne Trackers-Lawler.
Apologies
Councillor
for
Pollard?
lateness from Elisa and Sheffield.
Apologies for absence from Councillor Phil Thomas, Viddy Mohan, Steve O'Connell. Have I missed anyone?
It's hard to remember them all these days, Tim, isn't it?
It's been a long day.
Okay. Moving on the disclosure of interests, I'll assume they're as recorded. Urgent business. There's no actual urgent business as such, but I just want to update Cabinet on one or two items briefly. I think, as most people have seen, we, in terms of our children's services, we received the supportive letter in terms of the services remaining with the council from the Minister of State just before Christmas, and we'll be bringing a detailed report on that and some of the surrounding issues and progress to the next Cabinet. And but Councillor Fleming, did you want to add anything at this stage to that?
Just briefly. As you've just alluded to, we've had the initial letter that's come through from the Minister, which has recommended that we continue to run our children's services. And at the same time, we also coincidentally had a visit which took place, our regular visit that was due from Ofsted, and the findings from the Ofsted inspection have, although clearly no complacency, been of great interest, and actually I think for staff morale have been very important, because they have recognised some of the great leaps that have been taken in terms of progress since the initial inspection, and so that's just the initial update. Clearly, as I said, no complacency in where it is that we're going, but to have that second confirmation that came independently from Ofsted has been very helpful.
Thank you, Lisa. Related to that, although it's always good to get some extra money into this council's budget, I just wanted to update people on where we are with the wholly inadequate response in terms of ministerial support and the council's finances vis-à-vis USC and related funding. Councillor Simon Hall.
Thank you, Leader. Last week, the new Minister of State for new Immigration Minister announced the allocation of the £19 million that was announced just before Christmas for unaccompanied asylum seeker children council or councils with unaccompanied asylum seeker children, and also the allocation of £10 million of the Controlling Migration Fund. Now, bearing in mind that we are the Gateway Authority for unaccompanied asylum seeker children and have some 10% of the country's total of unaccompanied asylum seeker children, we had obviously hoped that a significant proportion of those funds would come to Croydon. Unfortunately, it was just 2% of it was approximately 2% of those funds that came, so 600,000 out of the 29 million has come to Croydon, which obviously, whilst every penny is welcome, goes no way to compensate for the multi-million-pound burden that caring for our unaccompanied asylum seeker children causes this borough. And whilst there were encouraging meetings between Home Office, civil servants and our officers about the day rate and the formula for unaccompanied asylum seeker children, there's nothing tangible there at the moment. So whilst the 600,000 is to be welcomed at one level, it's clearly wholly inadequate, and in particular, it's concerning that no methodology has been given as to how this was allocated, why other local authorities with a fraction of the number of children as we have been given the same amount. So that's something that working with legal officers to see what can be done to try and improve that situation.
Thank you, Simon, and I understand you and Richard will be working on the a piece in terms of a letter to Minister, and we'll bring that update back to Cabinet when we have that. But I would hope we would see some progress, but it is very worrying in terms of how that funding was allocated, whilst we always, of course, welcome additional funding. Moving on, I've just got a couple more to do before we get into the main agenda, which is obviously to update Cabinet and Croydon in terms of the decisions we had to take rapidly last week in terms of Croydon's library service. I think it would be fair to say that this council was far more prepared for the collapse of Carillion than Her Majesty's government were, and I want to pay my own tribute to all the staff involved in that. But and we were able to rapidly, with led by Timothy and officers, ensure that our library service, I think I'm fair to say, I don't think a single library closed, and but also, and Timothy can allude to this more, there's a huge opportunity now in terms of where the service is out of this frankly national scandal that is Carillion, to do something quite exciting potentially for the residents of Croydon. Councillor Godfrey.
Yes, thank you, Leader. It has been a tremendous week for our libraries, from the Carillion chaos to the stable certainty of bringing the libraries back in-house. Let us not forget that Carillion had been in trouble for many years. The FD reported that in 2013 they were paying subcontractors 120 days late. Their shares were being short-sold. Ending the ongoing uncertainty and chaos has and will mean considerable work behind the scenes. I'd like to thank the core officer team of Stephen Tate, Kirstine Rowe and Alan Nemo for picking up the pieces, visiting frontline staff and coordinating the council response behind the scenes. Despite Carillion being better known as a building company, their record on FM has also been poor. I'm delighted that the council's reformed FM team and contractors performed brilliantly and immediately fixed the heating at Norbury Library that had been problematic for some time. I can report that all IT systems are back fully functioning and the website will be rebranded and restored to the council ownership this week. Staff on the front line have been amazing. They have continued to serve the public and deliver despite the chaos around them. Council officers have been to every library and arrangements in place to ensure all staff are paid this month. A huge task as well as an opportunity now lies ahead for the council, as the leader says, to reintegrate our libraries at the heart of the council offer to residents as a front door in every community. A long-term investment plan will be needed for IT, buildings and the book fund. It is not possible to run a modern library service with one of the oldest book stocks in the country. The new library at South Norwood will be a template for our offer elsewhere. A multi-use flat-floor library will be a huge opportunity for local residents and help build the sense of community. I'm delighted we have been able to undo this Tory ideological privatisation, which has failed to deliver any benefits. It's failed to deliver change with the times. Libraries should not be run to extract profit from. They are a key public service. I'm pleased that once again we have been able to implement a manifesto pledge, even if late in this administration. Being in touch with the priorities of residents is vital, and this issue was and is part of our electoral alliance that saw us come to power 4 years ago. Residents have always told us that arts and culture are important to them, and I'm confident that our libraries have a bright future once more. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Timothy, and to the staff in and involved in that. And I think it'll be perhaps at the council meeting and elsewhere we'll reflect on the real achievement both there and the debacle that we've had to come out of. Councillor Hall, have you got anything to add in terms of the finance around this issue?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Just two things I wanted to add, as well as joining Councillor Godfrey in paying tribute to all the staff involved in making this such a success. The first point is that, recognising the difficulties of Carillion, we actually changed their payment terms towards the end of last year when they weren't able to give suitable bank guarantees, such that rather than paying in advance as the contract had been set up, we're actually paying in arrears so that we had no financial exposure to Carillion at the time of termination. The other point that I wanted to make is that in line with our commitment to London Living Wage, we're now ensuring that a number of staff, among the 73 staff that were employed by Carillion, who were paid, unfortunately, under the London Living Wage, will now see a pay rise and be paid the London Living Wage.
Here, thank you very much indeed. Excellent news to hear in terms of turning that challenge round. Finally, in terms of additional items, I just want to ask Councillor Butler to update us all on both the local plan and if there's anything additional to add on the cityscape issue. Alison.
Thank you, Leader. I've got two excellent bits of news about everybody's favourite subject, planning, this evening. I'm sure everybody here will be pleased to know that the government-appointed planning inspector has found that Croydon's draft local plan is sound and fit for purpose, and that will be coming to a full council meeting shortly to be ratified. It's a plan that sets out the borough's growth and development vision over the next 20 years. And it's been a long time coming. An incredible amount of work has been put into that. And I'd like to particularly thank the council officers who've taken part in that. And we'll touch on more when it does come to full council. But it's a really good day for the borough to see that that has been signed off and approved. The other bit of planning news is that Croydon Council will now be publishing developers viability reports as they're submitted as part of their planning applications. These will be made public. The reports are submitted to provide evidence of the developer's capability to meet all planning requirements, including meeting the levels of affordable housing required by the council as the local planning authority. And we think it's right that the public should be able to examine these along with the council. So that will be done in future. And just briefly, there has been a lot of publicity around Cityscape, just to give reassurance that we are doing our best that we can on behalf of local residents. We wrote to the government minister, who's now changed, but I'm hoping that the new one will be taking it up, on behalf of the residents there and residents living in other blocks in Croydon. And we've seen ministers make noises about the cost of this shouldn't be passed on to the residents in these blocks. And now we really need the government to back that up with some action on behalf of residents.
Thank you, Alison. Important issues and I suppose an indication of the fast-moving pace of events and politics in terms of agendas and events, as somebody once said. But moving now back to the main agenda, agenda item 5, the corporate plan performance. Clearly a huge document here, and which I'll ask Cabinet members to contribute to as well, and we'll take questions on in terms of many things achieved under the Ambitious for Croydon agenda, but many challenges still remaining for this local authority and our town going forward. I think we're going to have a short presentation. Is that starting now? I don't know why I've been handed that. So just to go through as some of the issues. Is that working? Thank you. On track, as it says there, I'm not going to read everything out. You can see this for yourselves, to deliver 1,000 homes with 50% affordable. In terms of the regeneration projects, that is now on site in New Addington. Economy and jobs, massive challenge for this town. Great news with the 7,000 jobs recently, but an ongoing task in terms of how we build on that and make sure local people get the opportunity to share in the growth, and that's the sort of agenda for Croydon Works and others to make sure we are a good employer and others are. Finance and Treasury, as Councillor Hall will tell you, this council letting out some of that building to get back some of the value for money for taxpayers back, more services online, an efficient council delivering value for money in tough times. And because we can do that, we can unleash projects like Don't Mess with Croydon, prosecuting fly tippers, invested in new street cleaning machinery, really starting to clean up Croydon, but a long way to go on that agenda, being led by Councillor Collins. Councillor King has led on the Air Quality Summit, really important work there and ongoing. new schools being built across the borough. Again, Cabinet papers are coming up in the weeks ahead on that, and tremendous achievements from our primary schools in terms of the good or outstanding, but in some schools still a way to go. Children and young people, choose your future has been a huge success as a campaign and needed to be off the back of the challenges we had back in the summer. The bus station, a massive infrastructure investment in our town. 20-mile-an-hour zones, Councillor King never drives these days at more than 20 miles an hour. The cycling strategy, again, Councillor King will be on a bike soon near you, but vitally important in terms of moving this forward. Families, health and social care. Someone trying to get out there, I think. In terms of the health agenda, prevention has got to be where the emphasis is now, and Just Be Croydon has been a massive part of that as well. But that's a huge agenda, I would suggest, for this borough going forward. Part of that, the White Ribbon campaign, is so proud that this council has taken a lead in that campaign against domestic violence. The work we've done, the training we've done, it's not up there, but the partnerships with Crystal Palace Football Club and others on that agenda. And as part of the community safety and justice, you can see the models we're rolling out there. We had a fantastic culture and leisure summit here, Congress a couple of days ago. And whether it's from the local parks, where it's, if you like, that's the front line of our leisure and sporting offer, to the £30 million investment in major projects like the Fairfield. We could have put many others up there, Box Park and others. Then that's just a canter through what the Cabinet has been delivered over recent months and years. They did show me about 3 different versions of that. Some of them went on for 10 or 15 minutes in terms of what this council's doing, but hopefully it's a flavour of some of the huge projects in terms of the Fairfield halls, but equally some of the stuff on the front line and on the ground that's changing people's lives. Thank you very much, and we'll put the lights back. Okay. Happy to take questions on an extensive report or contributions. Councillor Hall, in terms of where we are in terms of the, if we could tie in the finances to where we are in terms of these projects going forward.
Clearly, there's a very tough financial situation, as we saw when we presented the Q2 report, and I think it's worth reflecting in terms of the overall dashboard in the main report that all items are either green or amber, showing that the huge progress and work that's going on across the piece, but also our openness and transparency about not shying away from reporting the areas which are not going as well as we would like. In terms of the financial position, say we don't shy away from the fact that it's a very tough situation with the scale of government grant cut and the demographic and other pressures that we face, but the work is still being done to balance the books and also to provide the investment in our future, whether, as shown there, it's things like New Addington Leisure Centre, but as we'll come on to later, the tens of millions that we have invested and are investing in our school places, the affordable housing, the use of the revolving investment fund, all the different areas where we are delivering regeneration, we're delivering growth through the use of our capital. And it was mentioned there in terms of the buildings, and I think it's worth noting that with the way we've managed assets and FM, the new tenants, disposals of buildings, running services differently, we've shifted the cost of that aspect of this council by over £10 million since coming a year as a saving, which allows us to preserve the front line. And I just wanted, if I may, Leader, to be parochial about the community food stop, which only launched at the end of last year, but which is already transforming the lives of those affected by universal credit in the Fieldway New Addington area. Over 80 families signed up, for whom being able to get £20 worth of healthy food items for just £3.50 a week is really transforming their lives and showing what, even in these financially constrained times, we can deliver as a council.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Hall. I shall bring in the opposition because you've been quiet for a while. Councillor Pollard.
Thank you, Leader. Page 16 in the summary report, where you rate various broader aspects of performance. Some of the choices of grading seem somewhat eccentric to me, particularly the second column, third down, protecting children and vulnerable adults from harm and exploitation. Given what's happened with the Ofsted report, which had some very unpleasant reading about this area, how is it possible this is only an amber-rated area? Looks to an ordinary resident as though we're putting our heads in the sand somewhat.
Maria, is it on that subject or a different one?
I have a couple of questions.
Okay, I'll take those and then I'll get some colleagues to respond. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I'm just wondering, in the interest of transparency, will you be publishing the letter in full from the Minister to you, Read Children's Services?
I'm very happy to publish the letter if the Minister is. It's not a problem for me. It's a very helpful and positive letter. Although I should say, and I don't say this as a political point, there has been a ministerial change in terms of who the Minister is, but that shouldn't affect that.
Talking about the Councillor Fleming was referring to.
No, I know you are. That's what I'm referring to as well. That particular minister has been
yes, he's changed.
Has been moved on, I think, is the phrase.
Yeah. Could I ask? I have two further questions. That is around teen pregnancy, particularly around 15 to 17-year-olds. Historically, we know in Croydon it has been a problem, but we have, in fact, got it under control. I think particularly between 2010 and 14, the figures came down, but they're rising again, and that's quite concerning because they are, I would imagine, vulnerable children. Are there any looked after children in this group, do you know? And my second question is around the GCSE results, which are, of course, disappointing, particularly around English and mathematics, that have fallen below the national average. And I have to say that is very concerning, considering the other failures in your department, Councillor Fleming.
Thank you, Maria. Yvette.
I've just got one question on the point that Councillor Pollard raised to do with the amber rating. I know that Grant Thornton, the auditors, raised this as a red risk for a number of meetings, and I wondered what the position was in relation to that, because really what Grant Thornton have in terms of their audit report should be reflected the same in this report. I've got some other health questions, but perhaps you want to...
Well, Grant Thornton's audit reports are, I think, open to interpretation, and I might bring officers in on that, but I take the point you make. But I'll bring Councillor Fleming in.
Sorry, it's our council audit department.
I'm aware of that.
Yes,
I'll bring Councillor Fleming in, and she may or may not cover that last point. Elisa.
So, in relation to the conception rates for our teenage pregnancies, you will note that they are still slightly higher than the London average, but we do continue to have a year-on-year decrease overall in relation. This was one of the questions that was also asked at Council very recently, actually, kind of end of last year. So I can confirm that our teenage pregnancy rates continue to fall. The issue that we have is that at one stage they were considerably higher than our respective neighbours, but also the London average, and so that fall is not. Clearly, we haven't caught up as much as we would hope to. In relation to whether or not there are any looked-after children within that cohort, I am uncertain, but I can definitely make sure I get that information and provide that to you. And the GCSEs question around the issues there. So, as you'll be aware, we've moved to a different calculation under Progress 8. And what we found that within that is that it can take one or two schools to bring you below the floor level just in terms of how the reporting takes place. And we have had, I think it was 2 schools where the level fell. That in itself has caused overall the presentation across the board to fall. And so I just highlight that to say that 1 or 2 schools can make a complete difference in how the overall percentage is displayed. I won't say.
Thank you. On the auditors, does anyone wish to add anything there? Simon.
I think to be clear, the red risk is from the council in terms of the risks associated with the Ofsted judgment, and there was a qualification of the value for money opinion of our external auditors because of the Ofsted report, which is an automatic process. And actually at General Purposes Audit Committee, the auditors made clear that that was the only reason that they had done that, because that is an automatic part of their procedures. And other than that, that it's actually us identifying it, not other people, in terms of being, again, transparent about the risk to the council and both financial and reputational of something such as the Ofsted report. And can I just very quickly on Councillor Hopley's point, the conception rate is actually shown as declining, although it is above the London and national average, but the direction of travel per this report is that it's declining.
Thank you, Simon, and a very important factual piece of information I would suggest vis-à-vis the auditor's report. Look, in terms of an orange rating, and we've got to be very careful with the language here, because clearly as Elisa referred to earlier, in terms of Ofsted's informal visit, if I can put it like that, in the last few weeks, and the Minister's letter and the Commissioner's judgment, the Council's very much moving in the right direction. But there's a long way to go in terms of getting our children's services to excellent, where we intend to get them within the next 2 years. But it's very clear in terms of a direction of travel that journey is well underway. And we've taken clear political responsibility in recent months for it not starting earlier than it should have done, and for the actions we thought at one point should have been impacting that not happening. And I would suggest to opposition politicians, it's time you started to accept some responsibility for the condition we found that service in, and the 50% cuts from your government to it and other parts of this council. I've seen Councillor Louisa Woodley and then Simon.
Well, thank you, Leader. Just to add to the comments made by Councillor Hall as regards the teenage conception rate, there's a downward trend if you look at page 51, but also to add that in August last year, the Sexual Health and HIV Partnership Board implemented a task and finish group to review Croydon's approach to reducing teenage conception. And we do have a dedicated learning session being planned for later this year in order to raise awareness and develop a further action plan to reduce teenage conception. But to say it is on the downward trajectory, and it is very much something that is in hand, and we're very much focused on that.
Thank you, Louisa. Indeed. Simon.
Thank you, Leader. A couple of points on pack page 17 under achievements in the last 6 months for neighbourhood district centres and planning. Brick by Brick is said to remain on track to deliver approximately 1,000 units. I'm just wondering how it can be said to be on track, given that not a single council house has yet been built, and I'm wondering when the 1,000 units are expected to be available for Croydon's residents. And my second bullet was, as a Purley councillor, I was watching eagerly the completion of the upgrade to the Purley multi-storey car park, and delighted that that has in fact happened, but it was 6 months later than it should have been. It was originally press released as being available in July 17, and it wasn't in fact available till Christmas. So I think that's pleased that it's there, but extremely disappointed it took twice as long as it was supposed to take.
I'll bring in Councillor Butler in a minute to pick up on the housing issues, Simon. I mean, I would suggest that you know, we didn't want to see the car park delayed by 6 months, but it's better than the 8 years late it was under the previous Conservative administration, because it never happened, did it? Councillor Helen Pollard.
Thank you, Chair. It was interesting to read the commentary around about page 19 on the failed Labour projects in the town centre. Councillor Watson's pet projects have continued with pedestrianisation of the wrong street and putting a strange bench lip thingy, which is now causing antisocial behaviour on it. What Councillor Watson should have done is to stop the traffic in Surrey Street, and he's now playing catch-up with that. I'm not sure I'd call it an achievement to spend £1 million on a market and then have fewer traders. But anyway, moving on. I note that Fairfield Halls is not down as an achievement. Does this mean they're not expecting it to reopen on time this year? And my last point is, in the parks section, there's reference to Croydon Talks Parks consultation. The outcome of that is eagerly awaited by myself and lots of friends groups, and that was due in January. I know we're in January, but there's no sign of that coming out. So where is it? I know the council have had it since December. And then once we've got this master planning delivered, what resource have you got in place to actually make it happen? As far as I'm aware, there's nobody there actually can deliver the master plan, so we'll have some splendid master plans and then nothing will happen.
Very negative view of the world, I would suggest, Helen. I mean, you were amongst those questioning whether the Fairfield halls would ever happen, and now we're just down to which particular day in 2019 it will reopen. And I hope you've been on the many tours over there to see the fantastic work. And you know, I don't think we're going to take too many lectures from people who didn't invest in it for generations. And then, you know, when we launched the project to refurbish it, a £30 million investment in an iconic cultural centre for Croydon and South London, you continue to run the project down. It's very disappointing. I'll bring Councillor Godfrey in a minute. But Councillor Watson, you've been accused of pedestrianising Croydon.
No, I think look, the Market Street has no access to traffic during the day, and on the Saturday and on the Sunday. There's only time that there's some traffic down there is late of an evening. So Surrey Street is pretty. If you go down Surrey Street, you don't find cars going down there, do you? There's a market there, and it's absolutely untrue to say there's less traders there. That is a complete and utter lie. There are just as many traders as there were previously, and in fact, the market manager sent me a picture at. Over Christmas, saying how wonderful the market was looking and what a good Christmas the traders were having, and they do appreciate the work being done there. Perhaps you should go down there more often and speak to the traders. The pedestrianisation of the high street is something that came from local businesses. The businesses wanted support for that area. It also came from the police because that particular area is very unsafe. So the high street pedestrianisation, which is still being progressed at the moment, there's more work to be done there, is something that businesses asked us to deliver to help support local businesses. We are a council that listens to businesses. Tomorrow we are doing our soft launch of the Year of Business. We'll have 50 to 100 employers there. We have a number of employers that appreciate the work that this administration is doing to support businesses, even facing, you know, the increases in business rates, which was put through by your ministers, without thinking about the impact on the high street. So I think we are doing quite a lot to do with to support businesses, and we're listening to businesses and doing what we can to try and support our high streets in Croydon.
Thank you, Alison. Do you wish to respond on the housing questions that Simon raised?
Yeah. It's rather nice for Councillor Brew for once to be, you know, asking some positive questions around social housing and planning, which he's generally always against. So he'd be really pleased to know. No, it's not rubbish. He'd be really pleased to know that Brick by Brick is on site in about 30 sites as we speak. And we continue to look at the other sites that we're bringing forward, and there will be homes on those sites next year.
Concise answer. Councillor Godfrey on the leisure issues that are outstanding.
Yeah, no, thankfully we have elections every 4 years in London, not yearly ones. Otherwise we'd have this doom-mongering from the Tories every sort of 4 months before elections. It is absolutely sort of typical, isn't it, of small-minded opposition councillors in any borough, I suppose, but particularly in Croydon, who just talk down projects which are complex and and delivering for our town. Instead of actually asking, the questions and talking about, how many people came to the cultural conference this week from the Tories. I think I saw one of you there. These are major projects that are important to get right. And, there will be a handover of the Fairfield in November. And that will be showing that the town's delivering a big change for this borough and using culture to deliver that right across the piece. And, having a partner like BH Live, what do you think they think of all this quite childish behaviour in the council chamber from the opposition, when actually you could be celebrating what they achieve and what they're planning? Instead, we just see this constant drivel from the opposition with no actually ideas about how to improve the programme or invest in it. I've never seen the opposition talk about what areas of the Fairfield programme they'd like to invest in. Would they like to invest in dance or theatre or spoken word? Where is it? What's their cultural priorities? No, we don't see any. We haven't seen anything from the Tories this week about Carillion either. It's not just the fact that they botched the privatisation of the libraries. It's also the fact that there are huge numbers of staff who work for Carillion, subcontractors who live and work in this borough. And it's about time that the opposition paid little attention to them and actually the fallout that they're having from it. And let's not forget on culture who sold the Riesco collection. It was the Tories who broke promises that this town faithfully made to people who left items to this borough. And actually that's still shameful. And we don't talk about it much because actually it's about talking up this town. But actually you should consider that record. And I still haven't seen an apology from the opposition on that. And, it clearly does play with the electorate. I talked earlier about our electoral coalition last time, and I believe it plays into our electoral coalition this time as well. And then when you talk about parks, we've seen a 65% reduction in government grant. Is there any surprise that it takes longer than we'd like to get documents and change in our parks and across the council? No, it's not, because actually the council's multitasking. Staff are working very hard across all sorts of different areas and delivering multiple projects for the people of Croydon. So I'd like to actually thank the staff for the work they're doing on our parks and uniting and correcting some of those issues that we saw in 8 years of the Tories not putting any effort into our parks or open spaces.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Timothy. And I mean, Councillor Pollard, as a man who does seem to spend a lot of time running the town down and its assets and its people, and calling constantly for various people to apologise for various issues, not to have heard a word from you as the man who personally drove through the privatisation of Croydon's library service in the face of much opposition and advice. I understand that wasn't the action that would give the best outcome for our libraries, and that was off the back of Councillor Bashford, of course, who's now part of the Conservative team trying to save Theresa May, trying to close half of them down. For you just to sit there and, with a week gone past, have nothing to say, as Timothy said, to the people affected by the jobs up and down the country, let alone in Croydon, in terms of the Carillion fiasco and the library scandal that you oversaw, I think tells us everything. It's about taking responsibility. We took responsibility when Ofsted wasn't where it should be, and we've acted, and it's about time you took some responsibility for the multiple failures that you've been responsible for. Councillor Lynn Hale.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question around the housing performance figures, and I'm looking at page 48. It's obviously very encouraging to see some significant improvements in these performance figures, and I think much credit must go not only to the hard work, but actually a lot of the care behind the work that the officer teams work so hard with trying to help households with their homelessness concerns. But I'm a bit concerned about the very low numbers of affordable homes completed. It's less than a quarter of the target. So my question really is, how confident are you that the target of 495 affordable homes will be reached by the end of March? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Alison.
Thank you. To add to those figures that we've actually given there, we actually have got, in additional to the 119 completed, 521 that are currently under construction and coming forward. So we are hopeful, despite some of the issues around affordable housing, in particular the government's permitted development, that we can still overcome that with the many homes we've actually got under construction.
Thank you for that. I've seen what we're going round again. Okay, briefly, Yvette.
Thank you. I've just got a few questions on the health indicators and one or two other things. On page 15, I noticed that our personal independence coordinators based in 6 integrated care networks are providing tailored information, advice and interventions to reduce social isolation in older people. I know for a fact that we haven't got that set up in the south of the borough, so I've got concerns over that. On the indicators on page 17, I know that we still have a number of children, year 6, that are classified as overweight and obese. Also, we alluded to what was happening with HIV, but again, those figures are quite worrying. Vaccinations, I always raise that, you know, what can we do more to get more children at 5 years old vaccinated? And the alcohol-related hospital admissions, that's also, you know, relatively high at 523. There are a number of other issues in relation to health. And on page 60, during 2017-18, the number of safeguarding concerns is continuing to increase. My concern here is that we might end up in the same place as we have done with children's services. I wouldn't want to see that happen. I really do hope that there are strong plans in place, particularly as numbers are increasing. I think that's it really. Just concerns about the level of some of the numbers, even though 1 or 2 of them have come down, some of them still haven't moved terribly significantly. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we've got officers here as well, but Manju, do you want to comment at this stage on the some of the issues around the health indicators, or Louisa? I mean, over to both of you.
Thank you, Leader. As
Louisa?
regards the personal independence coordinators, I mean, when we get to the One Croydon Alliance, which as you know, used to be the outcome-based commission, I mean, we actually have someone, a personal independence coordinator who will speak, and they have been doing fantastic work. And yes, we have had this conversation that we haven't had the extension of the huddles to the south of the borough, but as we speak, the contracts are being worked out, and you will have huddles and personal independence coordinators in the south of the borough. You also mentioned the rates of obesity in year 6, and as you can, I'm sure as you can imagine, when you implement work, when you start a project, there's a time lag as regards seeing the improvements. And I really do have to compliment the schools, and I've been really encouraged by the fantastic work that's being done in exercise, in having edible playgrounds, in actually, we've seen huge increases in the take-up of free school meals, and we have many more youngsters having a balanced, healthy, at least one balanced, healthy meal. We do have youngsters who are going to breakfast clubs, but we also have programs of exercise that didn't exist before, along with working with not just the youngsters at school, but working with families. And we have Good Food Matters in New Addington, which obviously we hopefully that sort of project will extend. And Councillor Hall earlier referred to the food stop, because it's not just, it's very, we can do as much as we can as regards educating the youngsters, as regards eating healthily. However, when you have austerity hitting, and you have the poorest families only being able to, or thinking that they can only afford the sort of food that's cheapest and not best for them. So you do have to look at it in the round, but schools are doing a great job as regards making sure that we get youngsters to develop very good, healthy habits, and we will be looking at the results in years to come to see how projects, what difference has been made. But it is, I recognise, I hear what you say, and it is true that we haven't seen the results coming through yet, but it is to be expected, because you do not turn around rates of obesity in a year or 18 months. It does take a much longer time. You asked about the rates, the HIV rates. Well, the thing is, the proportion of people who are presenting late has improved since last year. It is still relatively high when you look at it as regards the rest of London and England. However, it's moved from the highest in London to the 5th highest, and we do have, I've said, I think every time that this has been raised, we do have, the demographics show that we do have a relatively high proportion of people who come from sub-Saharan Africa. But we have also, the work that's been done in Croydon has been recognised. We've received awards for the numbers of people that we have volunteering. We routinely offer HIV testing within antenatal settings, drug and alcohol treatment and support settings, and we're supporting GPs to offer testing where HIV is clinically indicated. And I could send you the other, lots of the other things that we are doing as regards working within the Black African community, and we are part of the Pan-London HIV prevention programme and delivering outreach activities and free HIV tests to populations at greatest risk. I remember one of the, because I went to one of the award sessions with some of the volunteers, and one of the volunteers said that when, approaching people in the street is not, it's not exactly the easiest thing to do, but they do go through the training. And I remember she got someone to come and take the test, and he sort of said, he came from a certain part of Asia, and he said, are you sure this test is free? And when he realised that it was free, he went and got some of his other mates to come and take the test, because the countries they come from, there's no such thing as a free test. They have to pay for it. So it's actually continuing to educate. And I think you asked about alcohol-related. We have got a new contract in place, and the figures I've got recently show that there's an improvement. There's an improvement in both alcohol, smoking rates are absolutely a fantastic improvement, but that's also the issues around alcohol. I could send you the latest figures. Right, I'll stop there, Leader.
Thank you, Louisa. Very important answers. Councillor Stuart Collins.
Yes, thank you, Leader. In my portfolio in livability and cleaner, greener, I want to be really positive about this, because it's been an exciting three and a half year journey where it's been really great to see so many wonderful staff in the council and showing so much initiative and really embracing the campaign. And it's been great also as well to see that when you invest in things with capital, and when you try and talk to your contractors and you get them in regularly, and you have a cabinet member that it wants to inspire them to do better around miscollections and about their performance, how things do improve. And over the past couple of years, it's been great at the staff awards to see people in this area in the Don't Mess with Croydon campaign winning awards, and seeing our monitoring officers who deal directly with the public receiving so many plaudits from both councillors, residents' associations and other places when inevitably there will be problems with contractors sometimes, or staff that aren't performing, but whereas they've gone out there, talked to Veolia and addressed those particular problems, and members of the public have come back and said that that's really really great the way that was dealt with, and I think it was a really wise investment on this council's part to increase the number of monitoring officers on the contract. And it also means that we've held Veolia to account. In the previous 4 years before this administration was in, we served no penalties whatsoever on Veolia. We've served £500,000 of penalties between 2014 and to date because we've been on their case. And that being on their case has made sure that when we held the negotiations under the new South London Waste Partnership contract, much of what we'd learned and our staff had learned and what our public had told us they would like the council to do has been included in the new contract. So we're really looking at an exciting new contract that's coming up. But just a little example on the top there about how wise our investment was in recycling. We were criticised earlier on that our recycling rate earlier in our term had dropped. But when you look at the London average, it's 33%, and you look now as at September 2017, I'm really optimistic that we're up at 39.55%, which is only 45% below our target, which is pretty good. And I think that's something that it's happening because we're doing things like collecting the Christmas trees. We're also going to be this year making the garden waste service all year round. And it's initiatives like that that are really helping. But I think we really are reaping the benefits as well of spending some money on actually doing up our household recycling centres. The amount of emails I get about saying how good Factory Lane is now and how much Purley Oaks has improved. And we've just actually recently put some money into Fisher's Farm to do improvements there. All centres that this administration are committed to keeping in the long term, because obviously we're a big borough and all those centres are really important. But we've actually taken care and consideration and listened to the public about those that moaned about the queues, etc. And I think the raising rate of recycling is promising. And I think we should be optimistic about the results here. The prosecution's level is fantastic compared to what we did do. The collection of fly tips, it's incredible. We only collected 3% of fly tips in 48 hours several years ago. We're now up at 85% now, 86.73%. That's fantastic. But we're not resting on any laurels here because we realise there's a lot more to do. And it's promising, obviously, that fly tipping is beginning to fall now, 21% across the whole borough, which is good from last year to this year. That's very promising. But we also recognise that we need to get those fly tips cleared even quicker than that. So I'm looking forward to Veolia working with us, particularly to try and get that new contact pickup rate at 100% within 24 hours. So getting stuff off the streets quickly, which obviously discourages other people to fly tip. And also in our contract as well, one of our big frustrations that was a direct result of the previous administration cutting the afternoon pickup of orange bags to save £1.5 million is the amount of extra fly tipping that was done by opportunist residents that saw, well, actually, Veolia are going to come and pick those orange bags up. I'll have my own black bag there, because those things were left on the street for sometimes 48 hours. And we've realised that that's got to be dealt with. So tomorrow I'm meeting with Veolia to talk about how they're going to meet this challenging new target, which starts from March, about getting those bags off the street quicker and discouraging people from adding to that. But also changing attitudes as well. It's really great that the surveillance squad that we started last June have done brilliantly in Thornton Heath, where they managed to catch a large number of people. But the one I've got the direct result from, in December, 51 investigations took place and 51 people were caught red-handed fly tipping, littering or doing environmental offences in Broad Green. And several of those are going to be going to prosecution. 31 of those were actually issued with fixed penalty notices. And that shows that we're actually using our resource wisely. And the next area we're going to be doing, and Councillor Pollard will be pleased to hear this, is that we'll be concentrating on that area in Norbury. We've listened to members of the public where I don't want to name the exact roads because that surveillance is happening overnight, and I doubt whether the fly tippers actually watch cabinet meetings, but we obviously want to catch these people and discourage them. But what I would say is that there's a lot being done, and there's still masses to do, particularly in terms of the behavioural change of members of the public. But we as a council should be very proud of the staff that we've got working on this campaign, who the public like. And, you know, the public don't blame the council for fly tipping or littering. They know that it's other residents doing it. But what they do want to see is the council actually trying to do something about it, and that it gets cleared quickly. So the big belly bins were a wise investment, I believe. The vacuums have been a wise investment, although sometimes frustrating because it's been quite difficult getting the charging points for all of them. But we're almost there now to getting them all in onto our streets. But I'd like to thank Councillor Hall for wisely listening to my argument about more investment in machinery and so on, and I will be meeting him next week for a few other things that I want to try. But what I would say is that I think it's important when we're doing our campaigning that we spell out that in this particular area there will be no cuts. There will be no cuts. And there hasn't been in the last 4 years. OK, we've charged for garden waste, but we didn't cut the service. But in previous administrations, we've actually seen the amount of landfill collections cut. And what I'm pledging now is, and which matches these results, is this Labour administration, should we win in May, which I think we will not be cutting any of the services. We'll be enhancing them, and we'll be working flat out to make sure our contractor delivers a tough new contract. And I think I've said enough. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Stuart. No, I'm just reflecting on that and some other contributions. I mean, you know, there's been a huge progress, which I think this paper's reflecting, but there is a long way to go in some of these areas. But it is about the investment and having got a grip on the council's finances after what we inherited 3 years ago. Even in these tough times, it's enabled us to make these investments. But much of this is very much a work in progress. Councillor Hamida Ali.
Thank you, Leader. From the perspective of my portfolio, I wanted to highlight, you did it in the presentation, but I really think it's worth highlighting our response to domestic and sexual violence. It was this administration that made tackling this area a corporate priority, and it was very much against a backdrop of cuts that we had seen previously. And we know that the prevalence of domestic violence in our society means that a borough with a population as large as ours will face significant numbers of survivors who need support. And the provision that we provide through the Family Justice Centre is hugely important. We have a really highly qualified team of independent domestic violence advisors who are not only based in the Family Justice Centre, but in the course of this administration we have seen independent domestic violence advisors based within now the police community safety unit, also within Croydon University Hospital, which I'm glad to see that now is being paid for by the hospital, which is positive. And that means we've been able to put more independent domestic violence advisors in our children's centres, which means it's bringing that support and that advice closer to our communities. There's also somebody from the Family Justice Centre based within the MASH now on a duty basis, and we're looking to really provide that coordinated community response that's so important by training champions within the community to make sure that information and the advice available is being taken up. The slides in the report also highlight the funding that we've secured to support women with no recourse to public funds, crucially making sure that refugee women and also EU national women who are facing these issues are also providing support. I think that is a real achievement of this administration, and important that we maintain that.
Thank you, Mida. And it's not an area that always grabs the headlines, but the work going on there led by you and others and our staff is amazing, and it is as a political choice that was made to focus on that, and it's absolutely will remain a priority. I'm looking around the chamber. If people are content, I'll move on to, if we could agree, Cabinet, the paper, and we'll update that paper again in June. OK, if we could move on now to the next agenda item, the One Croydon Alliance. I think I'm going to Louisa first. Councillor Louisa Woodley. There is a short presentation. It won't be as short as mine, but there will be a short presentation.
I've been piloting the discharge to assess pathway since the beginning. In my experience, it's a very good opportunity to get people out of hospital that don't necessarily need to be here because they are now medically stable and back into the community where their rehab and their re-aiming can really take place in their best environment. I've also had a lot of time to work with the assessment form and develop it to make sure it fits and it is fit for purpose for us in the acute setting, and it gives the information to the community services that it needs. And I've also spent a day in the community where I've done some of the Part B assessments to understand what happens when we go on to the other side and how we build an ongoing plan throughout the 6 weeks re-ablement that we offer.
I visited a client yesterday and she's so happy because she's so determined to get back on her feet so that she can pick herself, start having an active life again. So I think this life model is changing people's lives, unlike spending hours in hospital, lying on bed. When you're outside, you can exercise, you can go outside, you will be in your own environment where you can feel independent and supported by your family.
The LIFE project has been very exciting. It has changed the way that we are working with our client base and that we're working with other professionals such as the hospital and the social workers. We've built relationships that we wouldn't have had an opportunity to make before. I think it's very beneficial for the service users. They are getting home a lot quicker and they're having a lot more interaction with both the providers and the professionals involved.
Louisa, very, very powerful statements there.
Well, thank you, Leader. Just to pick up background as regards where we are in the One Croydon Alliance. As I said before, it was the outcome-based commissioning for over 65. So remember, people told us they wanted to remain, they wanted to be independent, they wanted to stay in their own homes, they wanted to be well for as long as possible, etc. And they wanted to tell their story once. And to date, I'll just bring you up to date, the alliance agreement, as you know, was signed off in April last year with the business case for out-of-hospital transformation, the implementation of the Living Independent for Everyone, the LIFE members of the LIFE team who you've just seen there, and Integrated Community Networks, ICN scheme, signed off in June. And this transition year has been a real success. We've seen tangible benefits, and thus this paper is coming to you to recommend the extension of the One Croydon Alliance for a further 9 years. And I'll just give you some of the figures as regards the achievements. 30 out of the 57 practices, GP practices in Croydon, had huddles by December. And yes, Yvette, I'm very much aware that the huddles haven't extended to the south yet, but they are being, I think you will find that by March, all GP practices will have huddles. But the numbers are that 375 patients have been seen in the huddles. There's been an 8% reduction in non-elective admissions from one of the huddles at the Brickstock GP practice. Another practice where there's been a huddle, the Mayday GP network. There's been a 4% reduction in non-elective admissions. And what we've noticed a difference is practices where huddles haven't been implemented yet. There's been a 6% increase in non-elective admissions. I visited the LIFE team two weeks ago in Leonard Road, and I was so impressed by the enthusiasm. There's a lot of hard work being done. A lot of them who'd gone over and beyond as regards the work that they did, but because they could see the difference, and you could see from the feedback that we've had, because they could see the difference that they're making, there were absolutely some sat around and spoke to me, but they were just so keen to get on and do the work. And again, the discharge to assess. Sorry, I have a sweet in my mouth because of the old sort of sore throat issue. 200 referrals they've received since September. 193 have been from wards and 7 from A&E. 80% of people receiving reablement do not need to go on to expensive packages of care. The target was 50%. We've already achieved 80%. We estimate that a 40,000 savings, a £40,000 saving for ongoing packages of care from just the first 25 referrals. And I'll quote just one last thing, 20% reduction in average length of stay on those wards in Croydon University Hospital, and that's down to discharge to assess. Now, there's a figure in your package on page 96 where it says on the 1st of December 2017, CHS communicated that due to the efforts of the discharge to assess teams, the hospital has 56 fewer escalation beds in use in comparison to the status 10 days before. That means that 56 patients are in the right inpatient beds, and CHS would have the potential of saving approximately £10,000 per day. And the model received much praise from the National Home to Hospital team, who visited us in November, and they're promoting what we're doing here in Croydon as a good practice example for the rest of the country to learn from. The downside of that is that I was hearing tales of patients being sent from St George's and St Heliers simply because people were hearing that the LIFE teams based here in Croydon were doing such good work. What we want to be able to do is obviously have that, that service, have people copy the service and therefore be able to see the true effects of all joined up working and be able to move some of that, some of the resources that we would have otherwise have spent at the hospital to move it upstream to the community and focus on prevention. I'm now going to hand over. In your package, you would see that we referred to, I've talked about the LIFE team, and we referred to the personal independence coordinators, and their Age UK is one of our alliance partner members, and Age UK works with the personal independence coordinators, and they're independent of the health and social care teams. We've got here Kate Pierpoint, who's the Chief Exec of Croydon Age UK, and we have Paul Etheridge, who is a personal independence coordinator, and I'll just pass over to them so that they could explain some of the work that's been done. But very good news so far, so we absolutely recommend that we move forward to the 9-year contract.
Very powerful report, and you're very welcome here this evening. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. So we've been running the PICS Personal Independence Coordinator programme for just over 12 months. And in that time, we've had roughly 250 clients for whom 265 personal goals have been achieved. And that's equivalent to looking at their health and wellbeing score used through the Warwick Edinburgh score. That their well-being has increased by 2.5 points. That's almost 3 above the national average. one of the main strengths of the PICS team, and Paul, my colleague here, is a PIC himself, has been their considerable and varied skills, but also their commitment and passion for people, which has really come through in the impact of the service through the last 12 months. It's meant that clients have been supported through physical, social, financial and psychological interventions, such a holistic spectrum of skills. It's had a really long-term and powerful impact on our clients that we're really beginning to see. For us, this has been one of the greatest benefits of delivering this programme, and it's really enhanced our portfolio for the importance of holistic and prevention. So I'd like to just pass on to Paul to give a few more stats and case studies and examples of our work.
Good evening. So I'd like to tell you about Susan. She's 70 years old. She lives alone in Selsdon, and she's lived alone since her mother died. And she was recently diagnosed with having heart failure. And she'd had repeated hospital admissions for chest pains to be explored. So our task, through the huddle, a PIC was tasked to explore with Susan her goals that she would like to work towards. So this is what we did. We had a PIC had a guided conversation with Susan, and that enabled her to express her fears that her heart failure meant that her heart is failing and she could die at any moment. And the PIC worked with Susan to look at different interpretations of that heart failure and ways of describing her condition. And what we also did is we engaged the GP to explain carefully to Susan what the letter from the heart failure clinic actually meant. And we also facilitated membership of a cardiac support group for Susan. And we encouraged her to resume activities she enjoyed. So she used to like going to exercise classes, meeting friends and going out walking with them. And because of her anxiety, she'd stopped doing those things. So the result is that she got to express how she was feeling. She saw her diagnosis from a different perspective and received clear information about her health condition. She's been able to resume her activities that she used to enjoy, and she started going on holiday again. And she even had a 70th birthday party barbecue, which she hosted with roughly 30 of her friends. And this is what Susan said. It's been a great help with my mental well-being, without which I might not have felt confident enough to get on with my life and enjoy it. The future is bright. Her well-being score has increased by 15 points. She says that she would be extremely likely to recommend the PIC service, and she's now looking at volunteering and giving back to the community. And Susan has not been readmitted to hospital. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, and I'm not sure, I don't know if it's her real name or not, but best wishes and well done to Susan if you're watching. Very powerful. Yvette.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the presentation and giving those examples. I think we've all heard successes of how helpful the PICs have been, and I'm really looking forward to them coming to Sanderstead, because in Sanderstead, as you know, we have a very elderly population. A number of people there, Lynn and my colleagues will tell you, are like Susan and are looking forward to having a party. But we can't do that without the actual work taking place. Now, I know it's a more complex area, Sanderstead, because we only have one doctor, and he's very aged. So my question is, how is this huddle going to work when literally in Sanderstead we have one doctor and one dentist, and I won't divulge the age, but, they might be older than Susan. So, I'd really like to know how this is going to work and really how we're going to get to those people living in that area and help them. And the strategy, I feel, should have started with the more complex area and perhaps move to the area that was a little bit more simplified, where you've already got a number of GP practices, because those residents are really in need of your assistance there. That's one question. The other question I have is around the contract moving forward. Once you, I assume, have got all this in place throughout the borough, you'll then move to how this contract is going to work, for the 9 years, and whether or not there will be a number of joint commissioning for joint posts. Because in order for this work to go forward and for real economies of scale to be met, you need joint commissioning for joint posts. And I wondered how that was being considered. Thank you.
Okay. Louisa, do you want to have a stab at that? I don't know in terms of this evening the Pacific Sanderstead question, if I can call it that, whether we have an outline or an answer directly this evening. But Louisa?
I did have meetings with officers middle of last week as regards to contract and how they would overcome the issue, because you have areas, large areas to travel as regards connecting people. But you do have GP centres, because the figure I've been given, I've been told that 33 practices already have, 30 practices already have huddles, and the remaining 27, and those 27 are mainly in the south, they will be, the contract is in place now for that to be extended to the south of the borough. So as regards to details as to how it will work, I'm sure we'll invite you to meet with me and other officers like Sarah, to indicate to you how it will. But I assure you that it is in hand, and we will be tackling the issue. Questions around the contracts going forward. There are areas, obviously, it is an alliance, and there are areas where it is appropriate to have joint commissioning. And on that question, I'll bring in Councillor Hall.
Thank you. In terms of the contract, what we have done here, which is very different from a lot of these arrangements in other parts of the country, is that commissioners and providers have come together rather than commissioners negotiating with providers. Now, that means that the partnership working that we've already got, even in this first transitional year, is actually incredible, and what we've heard tonight, for example, from Age UK as one of the Alliance members, is just one small example of that huge work. In terms of the joint commissioning, it will be the Alliance looking at the correct solutions. It will typically do that through one of the Alliance members, but that will all be done in partnership. And what, as outlined in the report, what we've put in place is a very strong governance structure, which ensures that the Alliance Board, where all the organisations are represented, sets that strategy. That then goes to the appropriate governing bodies of the Alliance members, including obviously this Cabinet, to ensure that we really are joined up and that the best way of commissioning is undertaken. What we're not going to do is create artificial structures, as was the case with, for example, the Integrated Commissioning Unit a few years ago here, which we had to dismantle, just for the sake of saying we've got a combined commissioning unit. We will do it on a case-by-case basis with the contracts, with the SLAs, to deliver the best service to residents in the most in the way that gives the best outcomes to residents, as we've heard tonight, and also meets the financial envelope of both the Council and the CCG.
Thank you, Simon, and Manju.
Thank you, Leader. Just a quick point. The same report came to the Health and Wellbeing Board, and CCG is as you know, CCG is the vice chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board, and we were quite pleased with the result and the success stories and the feedback that we have heard at the Health and Wellbeing Board meeting. And what I want to say is, if within that 1 year, if we can hear a number of positive feedback and success stories, let's wait and see for the next 9 years. And I'm sure it will be within the next 9 years. We will be before that 9 years will be finished, we'll be able to extend it to the other parts of the borough. That's all I want to say.
It's a start, it's a work in progress, but it is an absolutely, I think, inspirational piece of work. I'd also like to thank, in terms of our council officers, Rachel and Guy, for the work that you're doing in this area. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to our guests this evening, and we look forward to updates going forward, but genuinely life-changing work happening here, and I hope you get the message that we recognise that as a Cabinet. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much for being here. Okay, can we agree the recommendation, Cabinet, please? Thank you very much indeed. And moving on to the next agenda item, the Education Estate Strategy. Councillor Elisa Fleming.
So there was a presentation, but just to set the context. So the Cabinet report outlines how the Council will be delivering its statutory duties to ensure the school places for every child in the borough. And the number of children and young people in the borough as a whole continues to grow. We had seen previously an increased number of children who are passing through the primary age sector, and that is now moving over into the secondary. So as the number of children and young people grows, so does the number with special educational needs. And we're going to talk to that in some detail within the slides. But I'm pleased to say that we have plans for this, and we have successfully bid for the expansion of our special educational needs provision within the borough with a new free school, with a specialism with ASD and learning difficulties. So in this way, more children with special educational needs will be able to be educated within the borough, closer to their homes. So I will be going into the slides, but somebody seems to be moving them for me. Maybe you're concerned that I'm going off. Okay, So in relation to the special free school, as I said, to meet the demand, we've bid successfully. The free school will deliver 150 places for children with ASD, aged 2 to 19 years old. Our vision as a borough for children with special and young people with special educational needs is that they will be able to live an inclusive life within the borough, access to education, employment opportunities, and a life fulfilled. And we're hoping that this will take some steps towards doing that. You'll notice that our local provision, as it says, will be providing high-quality places. One of the issues that we have as a borough is that with the increased demands in terms of support for special educational needs provision, a number of our young people are educated outside of the borough, and so the need for this school was really, really pressing. Just to give you some idea of the numbers, Croydon's dedicated schools high needs block, we overspent at the end of the financial year 16-17 by 5.7 million, and that was attributable to the increase in the number of children who have been put onto the educational healthcare plans and an over-reliance on independent school sector placements. So again, and we've discussed that in previous cabinets, this is some of the work towards ensuring that our young people are able to be educated within the borough, and so there's no need for them to travel as far outside. There is going to be a need for additional special educational need places, and that is planned for throughout our existing provision across the borough through the expansion of some of our current schools, including the Beckmead family. And I would suggest that if any of you have the time and opportunity, that you try and go along to visit our Tennyson Road site, which is one of the new schools that has been expanded. And you can see some of the fantastic provision that is available there. I was lucky enough over the Christmas period to attend their achievements session. And it was, for me, such an opportunity to really see what that investment has done to transform the lives of those young people. Moving to our post-16 provision within the borough, there are plans in conjunction with the work that's taking place at Croydon College to try to deliver 75 specialist post-16 places by 2021. So we've submitted bids for capital funding to develop a centre of excellence within the college, and this will reduce the number of young people who again will be leaving the borough and give them better access to pathways to employment. Again within the borough, so that they're able to access jobs and opportunities close to their homes. And I just want to give you an example, again we'll speak in more detail within the report, of some of the work that's been taking place within the borough to build new primary schools within the centre. And there's just a small video that I'd like you to, hopefully, oh, it didn't come up. Okay. And that's just an example of some of the fantastic work that has been taking place across the borough to ensure that we've got state-of-the-art provisions available for our young people here. And also I just take the opportunity actually to highlight again some of the department work that takes place, recognising schools at the hearts of communities, but looking at the work with places and the level of investment and time that goes into creating these school places for our young people. And the outcome from that investment is it's clear to see. 90% of our secondary schools are good or better, 87% primary level good or better, right through to our pupil referral units. Again, the Beckmead family that I alluded to earlier in the work that they do there. So 47% of Croydon's children are attending outstanding secondary schools, and I've taken the liberty of highlighting that the national average is 27%. Okay, and we've got the standards paper that is due to come in more detail in the coming months to Cabinet. But these are just some highlights of where we are in terms of school standards and the work that is being delivered there. I point to the letter from Nick Gibb, who highlights that we're one of 10 most improved local authorities for our phonics screening checks. And we have in the past spoken at Cabinet around the work around our GDL, our good development levels, and at one stage within the borough we were below the national average, but that has now improved significantly. So, thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. Lots of amazing work. That was a very powerful video link, I thought, that went out there. Tremendous. I think we should share that widely. Any questions to Maria?
It's working. Thank you very much for the report and the presentation. I think it's good to see the extra places coming in on SEND in particular, because we know there's a lot of parental concerns around that area. So it's good to see that, and I also appreciate the enormous pressure on high needs and on the high needs budget. Anything that helps around that is very much to be welcomed. My area, I suppose, of concern is around the school place planning, and I do accept it's quite a complex area and sometimes can be quite difficult to get correct. You're cutting school places in 2 of the primary schools, the surplus places in Monk's Orchard Primary School and Norbury Manor Primary School. So can we be reassured that this won't impact on the secondary school places going forward, please? Thank you.
Elisa, do you want to respond?
Yeah, so one of the issues that we have seen is that there has actually been a dip in the birth rates. So historically, we tended to find that in the north of the borough, the birth rate was quite high, and you will recall that there was a period where we had to introduce an increase in school places amongst the primary age sector, and that bulge of that cohort of young people are now moving through into the secondary provision, hence the expansion that is taking place currently to provide secondary school places. According to the calculations that were undertaken, it was assumed that increase in the birth rate would continue in the north, and again, as a result, so the planning there in terms of the school places that were made available. But what happens is a year-on-year check is undertaken to ensure that the data is correct, and what we have seen is that the projections indicate that the birth rate has dipped slightly, and as a result, we've reduced the span, but we do have the capacity, if need be, if that was to increase at a later stage, to reintroduce those school places. It's generally good practice to have a 5% kind of leeway to be able to deliver places across the borough. And the only final thing that I would add on is that what we've actually seen, rather interestingly, is that in the south of the borough, the birth rate has begun to increase. There's a question about is that linked to demography and the transition and move from the north of the borough right through into the south, and there may be a possible link there. And as a result, what we've actually seen is a need to increase the school provision in the south of the borough ever so slightly. There is, as I said, within that 5% swing leeway currently, but we are keeping a close observation of that.
Thank you, Elisa. If there's no other questions, can we agree the recommendations, colleagues? Agree the paper? Thank you very much. If we could move on to the next agenda item, which is the cycling strategy 2018 to 23. Very important piece of work again. Councillor Stuart King.
Thank you, Leader. Very pleased to be bringing this report to Cabinet this evening. The current strategy was approved in 1998, so I think we can probably all agree that Croydon has changed considerably since then, and there's indeed further exciting change to come. The current situation in respect of cycling in the borough, I think it's fair to say, is less than ideal. Croydon has fewer regular cyclists than many other parts of London. We have a relatively low cycle ownership compared to many other comparable outer London boroughs, and only about 1% of journeys starting in Croydon is made by bike. So the new strategy, I think, is timely in that context. The new 5-year strategy sets out very ambitious plans to get more people cycling, and we know that that's possible because TfL research has shown that Croydon is the London borough that has the greatest potential for improvements in cycling. Strategy itself outlines the 4 key barriers that we need to overcome, and some of the means by which we propose to overcome them. So the details in the appendix at the back of the report, but in essence there are 4 areas. There is tackling the cycling culture that we need to develop in our borough. There are concerns and issues around cycle safety. There's the availability of cycles, in particular for households who are struggling to get by. And then something that I think even our sort of most ardent opponents would recognise something that's a little difficult for us to deal with, and that is parts of the borough's topography. The point, I think, about culture is particularly important, and just to respond to a point that Councillor Hopley made earlier around the fact that just over 1 in 3 10 and 11-year-olds in our borough are overweight or obese. I think it's really important that we instil a culture, in particular amongst our young people, that cycling is positive, it's a safe thing to do, and it's also a normal thing to do, that seeing someone on a bike, whether it's a colleague from a colleague from work, whether it's a fellow pupil at a school, or whether it's your grandparents, that should be considered a very normal, regular thing to see, rather than something that might be considered somewhat less than ordinary. As I've outlined, TfL's identified Croydon as the London borough that has got the greatest potential for cycling, and that's mostly due to the fact that we've got a very large number of mostly car journeys which could very readily be made by bike if the conditions allow. And a lot of these short journeys are focused in and around our metropolitan centre, the growth zone, where conditions for cycling are perhaps some of their most challenging. So it's right, I think, therefore, that the 5-year strategy is focusing an initial core of network of very good quality cycle routes focused around that town centre. Quiet ways for quieter streets, cycle highways with segregated or semi-segregated cycle lanes on busier roads, and greenways that connect our parks and green spaces. In the longer term, we're going to need a very comprehensive network of routes and cyclable streets right across the borough. So this isn't just about focusing exclusively on our town centre. And in order to achieve the ambitions that are set out in the strategy, we are going to have to overcome some very major hurdles. And we'll also need to seize opportunities as they arise, create openings, and was very much in my portfolio, as I found out over these past 2 years. Success does not come easily, and it certainly doesn't happen overnight. But the strategy does demonstrate a commitment to a fundamental and maintainable shift to more sustainable modes of transport, in line with the aspirations of the Mayor's draft transport strategy and, importantly, in line with the aspirations of this administration. Happy to take any questions, Leader.
Thank you, Stuart. Hugely important area. Excellent work happening here, and I think with the Labour administration going forward beyond May, that we will be out there fighting for every vote, that we truly will be on a cycling revolution in this borough, and much needed it is. Any questions to Stuart? Yes.
Thank you, Leader. Sorry, did you? Yeah. Thank you, Leader. I declare a couple of interests. I think I'm the only motorcycling councillor, and for the record, I motorbike about 200 miles a month, and I also cycle about 200 miles a month. Both those figures are greater than the number of miles I drive in a car. So I've got a foot in all three camps, if that's possible.
It's not often I'm rendered speechless, but well done.
I note the press release that came out a couple of days ago, which talked about separated and semi-separated cycle tracks. I'd like to know what separated and semi-separated cycle tracks are, because if it's anything like hedgehogs running along the dotted line for cyclists, they are extremely dangerous for motorcycles, because if cars behave badly and push, as it were, the motorcyclist over to the left, and then the motorcyclist collides with one of these semi-separation hedgehogs, they're extremely likely to fall off, and that actually increases the danger for motorcycling. I don't know what it does for the cyclists, but it's just so dangerous for motorcyclists. And I know these sort of hedgehogs have been put in some other towns around the country and then taken out again, because people realised the dangers that motorcyclists incurred when they were installed. Thank you.
Thank you. Stuart.
Thank you, Leader, and thank Councillor Brew for his question. I'm certainly surprised to hear that he's as active as he is, and I welcome that. And what? Well, no. Let me develop my point. The reason being that normally we hear sort of a very sort of singular pro-car view from the members opposite, and so therefore I am very surprised that we have someone that does not default see the car as the only means to get round. And actually, Councillor Brew makes the point very well that it isn't about making people make a choice to get rid of the car and just cycle or to only walk there. It's actually about using the most appropriate means of getting around. And I think what the cycle strategy identifies is there are lots of journeys that are being made that are relatively short, that could be made either by walking or by cycling or more sustainable means. But I'd be happy to kind of explore whether he might be keen to be an unofficial cycle ambassador for the Minority Party. In terms of the point you made about safety vis-à-vis segregated, semi-segregated, I think I'd be happy to kind of explore any particular routes that we're proposing to make sure that isn't the case. But broadly speaking, what we're looking to do when we're bringing segregated cycle routes in is to protect cyclists, because they are the most vulnerable road user on our roads. And one of the key points identified in the strategy, one of the big barriers that we need to overcome is the fact that people feel it is not safe for them to cycle.
Thank you for that. Simon, no, absolutely.
I'm all in favour of protecting cyclists. After all, I'm a cyclist myself. But this should absolutely not be at the expense of safety of motorcyclists. We've really got to balance that very, very carefully. It's the only point I'd make. Thank you.
Happy to
note that, and indeed, I think there's one scheme that I've already started talking to officers about, which involves segregated and semi-segregated. So I'm looking at Ian, and we'll make sure that we ensure that if there are hedgehogs on that route, they're not going to create an unsafe environment for motorcyclists or for cyclists.
That's serious points you raised, which Stuart's taken on board, and I'm sure in a cross-party spirit you can work with our cabinet member to ensure we're doing the right thing across the borough. Okay, can we agree the paper? Thank you, colleagues. If we can move on to the next agenda item, the London Council's grant scheme appears here annually. Councillor Hamida Ali.
Thank you, Leader. As you've just said, this is a routine paper that Cabinet receives every year, always at this time. We are required by law to make a financial contribution to the London Council's grant scheme. You can see from the paper that the budget for the Pan-London scheme is a little under 8.7 million, and our contribution to that is just over 290,000, which is just about 38,000 less than last year. These figures were agreed by the London Council's Leaders Committee in December and are now being considered by boroughs across London. And we're required to consider this now because if we don't agree this by the 1st of February, the contribution amount would revert to the amount for last year, which was higher. The London-wide grant scheme has 3 key priorities, all of which are very relevant to the issues that we face here in Croydon. 3 priorities: homelessness, tackling domestic and sexual violence, and tackling poverty through employment. We're the second highest contributor to the scheme, partly because of the size of our population, and the paper sets out the activity that we're doing to monitor the levels of benefit to the borough through those projects that are funded. And you can see, for example, that in relation to homelessness projects, it appears that the users of the services are broadly matching the projected benefit, whereas for domestic and sexual violence related projects, for example, actual users are around half those projected to benefit. So council officers have been making sure that relevant lead council officers are aware of the projects that are commissioned and vice versa, so that those who are leading on those London Council commissioned projects are aware of our key contacts and our leads. And we're going to be continuing to make sure that we're monitoring that to make sure that we are getting as much benefit as we can out of those projects that have been commissioned. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Hamida. Any questions to Hamida on this? Councillor Tim Pollard.
Just a comment, really. Obviously, this is a scheme that's been transformed quite a lot over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's become a much more user-friendly scheme. We support this.
Thank you for those comments. I know a lot of work's gone on at London Council's cross-party to make sure that it delivers in a more accountable way, perhaps practical way than it perhaps was doing a few years ago. But we'll make sure those comments go back. Can we agree the paper then, Cabinet? Thank you. And move on to the next agenda item, which is to receive some Stage 1 recommendations from scrutiny. Sean's with us. Sean, anything to add to the paper at this stage?
Thank you, Leader. Nothing extra to add to the 2 sets of recommendations.
Okay, thank you for those. Jan.
Yeah, it's just a couple of points I wanted to make. As far as keeping people informed about a collection of white goods at their houses and things like that, and it says in the report we're recommending that it's people are informed of the cost and things. Also, I'd like that added to it and the number of items that they can also put out as well. I think, because I've had that raised quite a bit, and I think it's very important that people know that of course, it prevents dumping and things. Sort of people are more likely, if they know that they can, for a modest charge, they can put out a number of items outside to be collected.
I'm sure that's completely sensible, but Chair of Scrutiny? Yes, nods all round, yes.
And the second point I just wanted to raise was about when fly tipping is reported by residents, etc., that there is some reporting back. I think it's very useful because it sort of rewards residents for reporting it, and they're more likely to help and work with us if they've had an update on it. I mean, it's not, obviously you can see for yourself if something's gone, but being taken away, a fly tip, but if it could be, just as a matter of course, it used to happen when we were in control.
Yeah. You rather spoilt at the end there, but I'm not sure it did, but I think in the spirit of the paper, both Sean and I can see Stuart nodding as well. We'll take that away and take it the points you make on board. Okay, can we receive the paper, colleagues, and move on to the next agenda item, which is invested in our borough. Councillor Simon Hall.
Nothing to add from the paper in front of you.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from members elsewhere? No? Okay. If we can then... well, I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. There are no yellow pages this evening, so can I thank everybody for your contributions and getting through a packed agenda in a reasonable time. That I think I clock at 8:19. Thank you very much. Good evening.